if I get elected. Now, if I don't get elected, it's going to be a bloodbath for the whole, that's going to be the least of it. It's going to be a bloodbath for the country.
That statement sounds pretty bad. Trump made it during a rally speech in Ohio over the weekend. And if you were to just hear that portion of his statement, you would assume that he was calling for a bloodbath should he fail to get elected in 2024, the general election. Well, the media, unfortunately, with the help of the Democratic Party, has actually done a fine job completely taking Trump's speech at this Ohio rally out of context to make it seem like he said something that he didn't actually say. And the bloodbath narrative that's playing out in the media is not only dishonest, after the full context was made apparent to the Trump critics, they doubled down on making it appear as though he was calling for violence in the country. Now, here's the fuller context, and then we'll discuss what we think about it. Let's watch.
Mexico has taken over a period of 30 years, 34% of the automobile manufacturing business in our country. Think of it, went to Mexico. China now is building a couple of massive plants where they're going to build the cars in Mexico and they think that they're going to sell those cars into the United States with no tax at the border. Let me tell you something to China. If you're listening, President Xi, and you and I are friends, but he understands the way I deal, those big monster car manufacturing plants that you're building in Mexico right now, and you think you're gonna get that, you're gonna not hire Americans, and you're gonna sell the cars to us. No, we're gonna put a 100% tariff on every single car that comes across the line, and you're not gonna be able to sell those cars. If I get elected, now if I don't get elected, it's gonna be a bloodbath for the whole, that's gonna be the least of it. It's gonna be a bloodbath.
So presenting Trump's statement as one in which he's calling for a bloodbath if he fails to get elected is incredibly dishonest. And Cenk, I mean, I've saw this all over the media over the weekend. There was a lot of backlash to the media because of their dishonest framing and the fact that they took him out of context. And then a lot of people in the media continue to double down, including Joe Scarborough, which we'll get to in just a moment. But I'm curious what you think. Or am I being too fair to Trump here?
A lot of mainstream media don't give you honest news. We do. You know why? Because of you. Paid membership on YouTube makes all the difference. Hit the join button below and you become the hero that sustains us.
No, you're absolutely right. In fact, I covered this speech right after it happened, which you should always check out on youtube.com/theyoungturks. And what I said was, no, he was meant it in an economic sense. Now, he said a ton of absurd things in that speech, as he always does. Has he called for violence in the past? I think he has, and he celebrated it when it's come. But in this particular case, he was clearly talking about tariffs. He said it in an economic context. Not guilty. Now, should Trump be more careful given that people caused the riot at the Capitol because of him, and he didn't really stop them, and they wanted to murder his vice president, and he told his chief of staff that he didn't mind? Yeah, given that context, given the history of Donald Trump, he should be a lot more careful about calling for bloodbaths if he doesn't win. Now, having said that, a ton of people say bloodbath in an economic sense. Oh, the stock market had a bloodbath today with all the selling, et cetera, et cetera. So no, in that context, it was not a call for violence. And I think that the media kind of clowns itself
totally
when they take things out of context like this and are unfair to him. When he said a million horrible things, you don't need to stretch to make this case against him. I think it ruins your credibility, to be honest.
Not only does it ruin the credibility of the press that dishonestly frames Trump in this way, in the future, when they make claims that are grounded in reality and have merit, people will not trust the media. So when you have pundits asking themselves, oh, where did these QAnon people come from? Where did all these conspiracy theorists come from? How come they don't trust in our institutions? Why don't they believe the journalists? Why do they think the journalists are elitist? This is why, this is exactly why. They have done a great job discrediting themselves when in reality, just report the facts. Report what he said in context and don't make it seem as though he's calling for a bloodbath in the country if he fails to get elected in November. Now, with that said, I wanted to just note, you mentioned how bloodbath is used all the time in an economic sense. Just last week, we covered the story about the changes at the RNC and how Lara Trump, who is his daughter-in-law, is now the co-chair of the RNC, and they fired about 60 people. And you want to know what the press referred to that as? A bloodbath.
That's it. They're calling for violence. Okay, guys. That's exactly what we're talking about. And we're now showing you a couple instances. I know it's anecdotal, but I'm seeing it online as well. You take it with a grain of salt if you like. But a bunch of MAGA guys that we interview go, well, on the left, there's one set of people that I sometimes trust. It's Young Turks. And then mainstream media sees that and goes, aha, you guys are guilty. No, guys, I've said meaner things about Donald Trump than almost anyone in American media. So you can go look at tens of thousands of videos. But I never misquote him. I don't take him out of context, and that's why people trust me more. So when I don't kiss the ass of the establishment. And this guy's, let's be honest, there's one other layer here we're not talking about, which is that the Biden team wants to put this out as, okay, here he goes with a call for violence. And when you see the media copying almost word for word what the Biden political team is putting out, that's how you lose credibility, okay? So stick to the terrible things he does say, not to the things he didn't say or didn't mean. He's off prompter there. He's got verbal diarrhea.
Oh yeah.
And look, he did say an outrageous thing there. I know in the context of Donald Trump, it doesn't sound so outrageous, but 100% tariff is mental. It's totally insane, right?
It totally takes away from the legitimate thing you can critique him on, right?
Right.
And it's just, again, I would rather oppose Trump for who he really is, as opposed to not liking Trump based on a fantasy that's been made up and manufactured by the Democratic Party or the press. I mean, he's a target-rich environment. Don't make things up. All it does is lead to distrust toward the press, toward the media, toward journalists, and it's ridiculous. And by the way, I don't blame Biden and the Biden campaign for wanting to really emphasize this and take Trump out of context and get the media to rile up people into thinking that he would call for violence if he doesn't get elected. I mean, it's a good distraction from the real bloodbath that's taking place in Gaza right now, something that's been greenlit, supported, and funded by our president, Joe Biden. With that said, let's go to Joe Scarborough, who had a proper meltdown this morning, even after the full context of this situation was revealed.
He's talking about a bloodbath for America. It's laid out in the terms of it. And these idiots on Twitter, these idiots on cable news, these idiots on Sunday shows going, well, our president, he was talking only about the auto industry, and this is one more. It's just, let me say that at 6:15 a.m. It's just, he knew what he was doing. We're not stupid. Americans aren't stupid. He was talking about a bloodbath. Sometimes a bloodbath means a bloodbath. And when he finishes by saying, and that's just going to be the least of it, seriously, these people may be stupid, we're not.
There really is something rich about Joe Scarborough calling everyone else stupid as he continues to push a completely manufactured and fake narrative about what Trump said during that speech.
Yeah, and you made a great point there, Anna, that I hadn't even thought of. Mainstream media, Biden team, their advocates, etc., have called for bloodbath after bloodbath. The Iraq war, what Israel's doing in Gaza now. The one thing they criticized Biden on was, how dare you withdraw from Afghanistan? So they've advocated for endless bloodbaths. In real life that we committed, thanks to people like Joe Scarborough, he was completely in favor of the Iraq war. 1 million people died in that war. Okay, so now you're gonna talk about an out of context economic quote. And again, you want to talk about stupid. When MAGA guys, or more important, way more importantly, when independents see you misquoting him in this particular context, you lose credibility that they don't believe you on the 9 other things he actually did say. So, okay, have at it, Hoss. And I know that your demographic of like super Biden lovers on MSNBC, the 98-year-old voters, sorry, but their average age on MSNBC viewers is about 70 years old, okay? So those people are like, yes, we hate Trump so much, Biden's the best. Tell us more things we wanna hear, Joe. Tell us more things we wanna hear. No, in the real world, you lose complete credibility doing nonsense like this. And you think that Trump meant that strategically? Come on, Joe Scarborough. You know Trump isn't bright enough that he planned an extemporaneous, like 10, 15-second little thing in the middle of his talk about tariffs. He didn't plan that. He can't stop himself.
No, listen, not guilty on the bloodbath statement at all. Not guilty, not guilty, not guilty. Now, there was other portions of his speech that were reported on that I thought, well, this sounds really, really bad. There were allegations that he referenced migrants and said that they're not human. So I was like, why isn't the press more focused on that statement as opposed to the bloodbath statement? So then I went and watched the entirety of the speech just to make sure that I got the full context of that statement. Now remember, the press is presenting it as Trump calling all migrants not human. Is that really what he said? Let's watch.
If I had prisons that were teeming with MS-13 and all sorts of people that they've got to take care of for the next 50 years, right? Young people, they're in jail for years, if you call them people. I don't know if you call them people. In some cases, they're not people, in my opinion, but I'm not allowed to say that because the radical left says that's a terrible thing to say. They say you have to vote against him because did you hear what he said about humanity? I've seen the humanity, and these are bad. These are animals, okay? And we have to stop it. We can't have another Lakin.
So in the end there, he mentions Lakin. He's referring to Lakin Riley, a Georgia college student who was killed. The suspect is an undocumented immigrant from Venezuela. And yes, the right wing has really latched onto that story to do their own campaigning and yes, fear mongering to some extent about migrants. Now look, you can say that Trump specifically referring to MS-13 gang members and murderers like the person who murdered Lakin Riley is meant to paint a picture of migrants in general, and you can be critical of that. But he very clearly was not saying that all migrants are not human.
Yeah, no, look guys. So when he first started talking about people coming over the border being rapists and criminals, he did not qualify it with MS-13 or gangs, and it was an outrageous thing to say. When he asked his administration, can they put razor wire and shoot people coming across the border in the leg and put in alligators as snakes, he did not qualify it. He has said perfectly vicious and horrible and dehumanizing things about immigrants. So you don't need to make things up. In this context, he was clearly talking about MS-13. Now, again, you could say, hey, you shouldn't talk about any person that way. Okay, that's fair, but don't pretend that he was talking about all immigrants here in one of the few cases where he wasn't. So, being unfair doesn't help you at all. So look, there is one legitimate critique, and Scarborough touched on it for a second. If he had stayed on that, I would have had a different opinion. And one of our members pointed it out, Boomer Dragon Cat. Actually, a couple of them did. Whole bunch agree with us. Thank you. I'll read that during the break. Watch the live show. You'll get so much more. Anyway, I disagree. Cenk and Anna, Boomer Dragon Cat said. He said the auto industry would be the least of it. His bloodbath statement meant what was going to happen to the country. Love you though. Love you back. So in that case, I do disagree with you. I don't think he meant it for the whole country. But the good point is, when he said that'll be the least of it, that was my only concern. And I pointed that out in the live video I made right after the speech. Don't say the least of it. What do you mean the least of it, right? So we're not trying to minimize the things that he has said and the things that he warns about, oh, you better elect me, otherwise there's gonna be trouble. He said that before, right? Don't stretch, don't be unfair for no reason when he gives you 1,000 things for fodder to legitimately criticize him on.
So in the middle of an economic rant, when he says, and that'll be the least of it, we're going to assume that he's referring to-
No, I'm not assuming, Anna, but I can see how people would think, hey, maybe he doesn't mean economic when he says it'll be the least of it. Do you see what I'm saying? So it's okay, guys, you just now heard it all in context, so you can make your own decision on what he meant.
Yeah, so the final thing that I wanted to just draw attention to was, I think, the worst and also cheesiest part of his rally speeches, which typically begin like this.
It began as many Trump rallies do these days, with a song by the so-called January 6th prison choir.
Please rise for the horribly and unfairly treated January 6th hostages.
Made up of those serving time for storming the Capitol. Trump framing them as hostages, patriots.
You see the spirit from the hostages, and that's what they are, as hostages. The first day we get into office, we're going to save our country, and we're going to work with the people to treat those unbelievable patriots.
Okay, so I have mixed emotions about this. Number one, no, people who broke the law on January 6th and broke into the Capitol absolutely should be, tried, and if they're found guilty, convicted of the crimes they committed. They are not hostages. But the reason why I say I have mixed emotions is because how do you not laugh when you hear that cheesy ass guy talk the way that he did as he was introducing Trump, like hostages, like.
Yeah, it's because Trump's events are like a WWE rally, an event, and that's why I explained this a long time ago. While they'll threaten to kill Jim Acosta, CNN anchor, who by the way also is taking this bloodbath comment out of context, but has been personally, threatened, etc. And then they'll want to take pictures with him and get his autograph. So why? Because they view him as a heel, like you do in wrestling.
Yes.
Oh, he's one of the villains and Trump is one of the good guys, and that's why they have like, "Are you ready to rumble?" before the speech, because they're doing it as a form of entertainment. But that doesn't excuse that absurd, framing of them as hostages. Oh, those poor guys that were just trying to bash the cops' heads in as they were going to murder the vice president. Oh, poor them! What patriots there? They were chanting, "Hang Mike Pence, hang Mike Pence." They were going to murder the vice president. They're not the victims. But remember, Trump and his administration folks were 10,000 times more guilty. They egged them on, they encouraged them, they didn't stop them, and they're the ones who did the coup plot with the fake electors. So Trump is the biggest target-rich environment in politics you will ever see. Needlessly making things up about him is the world's worst political strategy. But the Democrats and mainstream media just can't help themselves. And that's part of the problem.
If you enjoyed this video, that's because of our members. They make us independent, they make us strong, and they make us honest. Become a member today by hitting the join button below.